Come on in here, we got stuff. But first, I gotta refresh my coffee. Or café, as you like to say. So, many of you have probably been checking out my Twitter feed today and seeing the comments from my detractors and the Trump critics who were very unhappy with my conversation with Sam Harris. Yeah, it's available on podcast. You can find it on my Twitter feed and on Sam Harris's Twitter and webpage. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk about the points that the critics are making, and then to try to put it in some kind of context here, because I'm having a good time with it. So the way the anti-Trumpers heard my conversation on podcast with Sam Harris, here's what they heard, and I'm paraphrasing what they've paraphrased to me about what they heard. So what they heard was Sam continually saying things like, but what about Trump's lying, his ethics, his morality? And then what they heard me say was, forget about that stuff, he's an effective president. So that's sort of what they heard. But and I won't argue with what they heard, because that's what they heard. But what I can do is clarify. And I think I can clarify in a way that would satisfy them. So when Sam was talking about ethics and morality, well, let me back up. When he talked about Trump's fact-checking, I believe, if you listen to the podcast, I agreed that Trump does not pass the fact-checking as well as other politicians traditionally have. So on that point, on does President Trump say things which pass the fact-checking, Sam and I are in complete agreement. He does not. Okay. So in that part, there wasn't any disagreement. So if somebody heard a disagreement, then they probably hallucinated that part. Then there was a question about the ethics and the morality of President Trump. And my position, and I don't remember exactly how I responded in each case on the podcast, but I'll give you the response now. My position is not that ethics and morality don't matter. I would never say that. But that's what people heard. What I do think is that every situation is different, and you have to set priorities. Now, in my worldview, President Trump is unique among leaders and among really just about anybody I've ever seen, in that he does know how to ignore facts without it causing any trouble. And he's done it so often that it would be hard to think it's an accident. And when I say that, when I talked about President Trump being directionally accurate, I meant that when he's off on his facts, it's usually in the right direction. It's to make his point. It's not like his entire point becomes moot because he got a fact wrong. Usually his point stands, but some of the evidence that he gives for his point, are hyperbole or just, wrong. But it doesn't really seem to ever make any difference because he's always right in the right direction. Yeah, I see somebody saying relativism. So here's the thing. If other people want to classify what the president does or has done or is thinking as unethical or immoral, I don't argue with that at all. I have no disagreement with that. Right? I don't think I voiced any disagreement to that. But I think what people want me to say is, damn it, he's acting unethically and immoral, and therefore the world will fall apart in unspecified ways. And here's why I don't say that. Because, first and foremost, I'm not the Pope. It is not my job, nor would it be appropriate, even slightly, for me to pass judgment on other people's ethical or moral standing. Let me tell you an old joke that kind of gets to that. There's an old joke of an old lady who walks into a butcher shop, and she says, "Are your chickens fresh?" And the butcher says, "Oh yeah, they're totally fresh." She goes, "Are they really fresh? I want the freshest chickens." And he goes, "These are really fresh." And she goes, "Let me see one." She takes the chicken, and she spreads this little leg. She puts her nose right up into the little chicken carcass's bunghole, and she goes, "This doesn't smell so fresh." And then the punchline is the butcher looks at her and he goes, "Lady, do you think you could pass that test?" Now, that joke probably doesn't have any real bearing on my point, but it reminded me of it. The point is, if people are demanding of me to make a moral or ethical judgment on either President Trump or anyone else, you're really talking to the wrong guy. So when people criticize me by saying, "You seem to be avoiding the question," I'm not doing that to be clever. I'm avoiding as hard as I fucking can. And I'm telling you, you're talking to the wrong guy. I'm not your pope. I'm not your priest. I'm not your ombudsman. You don't come to me for your ethical and moral advice. The best I can do is try to live my own life in some reasonable way. But my God, I wouldn't have a friend in the world if I couldn't even talk to them or interact with other people unless I agreed with all of their ethical and moral stances. Do you know how many people I agree with on an ethical and moral level? Just about none. I mean, that number is so close to zero that I would have to just divorce myself from living in the real world if I put that as my highest priority. Is, my God, I can't be seen hanging around with these people who have different ethical judgments than I do. So when people saw me evading the ethical or moral questions about the president, that's exactly what you should have seen. And I would argue that that's exactly what I should do. But keep in mind, I'm not disagreeing. So when Sam says it's my judgment that he's acting unethically and immoral, I have no complaint with that. I have no complaint with anybody having a different opinion about anybody's moral or ethical standing. Those are largely subjective. Some of it depends on your religious background. Some of it depends on how bad you've been yourself. There are a lot of factors into your judgment about that. But the larger question, and the more important one, in terms of just priority, I'm not saying that ethical and moral things have no value or they're not important. I'm just saying that you have to rank things. And if, for example, you had a choice of lying to somebody or saving their life, and you only had two choices, I would say saving their life might be a higher priority than telling a lie, right? Even though the lie is unethical on some level. So when I asked Sam during the interview what would be examples of real life costs that we've seen from Trump either ignoring the facts or acting, in his view, unethically or immorally, I asked him to point out some examples where that clearly has been a problem. And I acknowledge that in some generic sort of conceptual way, we would all want to have the most ethical and moral leaders we could have. I don't have any argument with that. Who would argue with that? I'm just saying that what choices we had were unethical, immoral Hillary Clinton or President Trump, and he's got, as many people who have bad opinions of him. Those were the two choices. Now, one of them is going to be more effective than the other one. I think that's Trump. All right? But unless somebody can come up with some, and there was one today, apparently the New York Times, our interview with Trump, he said something about health care costing a young person $15 a month. And there was some speculation whether he was confusing that with cheap life insurance numbers he's seen on TV commercials or something. And so the idea was, oh my God, how can he be our leader and deal with this healthcare thing if he doesn't even know what healthcare costs. I mean, and $15 a month is not even close, right? So, to which I say, what else does a billionaire not know how much it costs? How about everything? Do you think Trump knows what a loaf of bread costs? No. Does it matter? No. Because when he said $15, he was probably thinking it was hard to afford for some people, which it would be. But does it follow that Trump thinks it costs $15 a month and therefore he's not working on it? Or therefore he's going to make different decisions? It doesn't matter. And it's fairly consistent that the things he gets wrong don't matter. Now you could say, man, we've dodged a bullet there. But look how many bullets we dodged. It's like a whole fusillade of bullets. And we keep dodging them. Is that an accident? No. It's because the things that he gets wrong are things that just don't matter. Now look at the things he gets right. Immigration, the economy, ISIS. Mostly right. Little stuff he gets wrong, doesn't matter. He bashed universal health care yesterday. He said he wanted everybody to have coverage, which is it could be construed as slightly different from universal single-payer stuff. People who cite 17 intelligence agencies, right? That was really 4 intelligence agencies, and let me pile on to that a little bit more. I remember when everybody was saying 17 intelligence agencies agree that the Russians were involved in the election. Well, it turns out it was 4, which is still a lot. But let me throw some shade on that. Let me tell you how the real world works. One of those agencies said some version of, we think it was the Russians. And then 3 others said, well, if they think so. That's how you get to 4. And do you know how you get to 17? Well, just being inaccurate. So it probably went from one that may have been biased and politically motivated to suddenly 4 saying, well, if they say it, we say it too. I'm not going to argue with the FBI. They've looked into it. Hey, we haven't even looked into it. And then suddenly it turns into 17. He added all his IC. What's IC? Being inaccurate equals blatantly lie. I think in some cases there's some blatant lying going on in politics. I know. It's very surprising. Was I high during the interview? No. What about the tax returns? You're addicted to me. Good, you should be. What about NASA? So those of you who've been following me for a while, you knew that if a Hitler analogy came up, I was going to jump on it. And Sam did go to the Hitler analogy in the first few minutes, and I was delighted for those who had been following me, because they would see more humor in that. Sam didn't sound confident on, Well, the thing is that the way I broke down the conversation on climate science is that you can give different parts of it different credibility. And I don't remember him disagreeing with my assessments that the science is credible, the chemistry and the physics. The models are less credible, and then the economics